Hello, my name is Jobe. I'm the Poet Laureate of Davis, California, and for this week's video poetry reading, I'm going to be reading to you from Robert Bly's award-winning book, The Light Around the Body, which my own copy is, can you see that there? Autographed by Bly. Back in 1996, he signed that for me. The book's from '66, and it won the National Book Award in '67. I met him at a reading in 1996, and he called me kid when he signed it. I was 40 in 1996, but, that's okay. I don't mind being called kid by Robert Bly. That was kind of cool. Hey, kid, let me sign that, kid. Robert Bly, Silence in the Snowy Fields was the book that first made him well known in the early 60s. The Light Around the Body is a collection of poems that are largely political. A lot of them are political. And he rags on both the Kennedy and Johnson administrations, although Bly is a liberal. He's not a Republican. But at the time, both parties had conservatives in them, and Johnson and Kennedy were really both moderates, not liberals. But I don't want to get political with this. But things were happening that people were protesting. The Vietnam War and Johnson's administration, the Bay of Pigs fiasco in Cuba and Kennedy's administration. So anyway, a number of poems in here reflect these things. And when Robert Bly won the National Book Award in 1967 for this book, he brought a representative of a draft resistance group on stage and signed the prize-winning check over to them on stage. So that was how he felt about it. But let's get started with these. We'll begin with the executive's death. Merchants have multiplied more than the stars of heaven. Half the population are like the long grasshoppers that sleep in the bushes in the cool of the day. Have you ever heard Robert Bly give a reading? YouTube him so you can hear his cadence. He would read it more like, merchants have multiplied more than the stars of heaven. I love to listen to him read, but I'm me, not him. Merchants have multiplied more than the stars of heaven. Half the population are like the long grasshoppers that sleep in the bushes in the cool of the day. The sound of their wings is heard at noon, muffled near the earth. The crane handler dies, the taxi driver dies, slumped over in his taxi. Meanwhile, high in the air, executives walk on cool floors and suddenly fall. Dying, they dream they are lost in a snowstorm in mountains on which they crashed, carried at night by great machines. As he dies on the wintry slope, cut off and dying, a pine stump talks to him of Goethe and Jesus. Commuters arrive in Hartford at dusk like moles or hares flying from a fire behind them. And the dusk in Hartford is full of their sighs. Their trains come through the air like a dark music. The sound of horns. The sound of thousands of small wings. It's very beautiful. This is a poem I've loved for a long time. Johnson's cabinet watched by ants. Now, Johnson, of course, we're talking President Johnson, and this poem is from that era. Johnson's cabinet watched by ants. Listen in the last stanza. He makes a great leap in that stanza. It is a clearing deep in a forest. Overhanging boughs make a low place. Here the citizens we know during the day, the ministers, the department heads, appear changed. The stockholders of large steel companies in small wooden shoes. Here the generals are dressed as gamboling lambs. Tonight they burn the rice supplies. Tomorrow they lecture on Thoreau. Tonight they move around the trees. Tomorrow they pick the twigs from their clothes. Tonight they throw the fire bombs. Tomorrow they read the Declaration of Independence. Tomorrow they are in church. Ants are gathered around an old tree. In a choir they sing in harsh and gravelly voices old Etruscan songs on tyranny. Toads Nearby clap their small hands and join the fiery songs, their 5 long toes trembling in the soaked earth. That is marvelous. And I have marked here a dream of suffocation. Accountants hover over the earth like helicopters, dropping bits of paper engraved with Hegel's name. Badgers carry the papers on their fur to their den, where the entire family dies in the night. A chorus girl stands for hours behind her curtains, looking out at the street. In a window of a trucking service, there is a branch painted white. A stuffed baby alligator grips the branch tightly to keep away from the dry leaves on the floor. The honeycomb at night has strange dreams. Small black trains going round and round, old warships drowning in raindrops. Romans angry about the inner world. This is also a very well-known poem of Bly's from that era. Of course, he became so famous in the 90s that a lot of the stuff from before the 90s kind of gets overlooked today, which I think is unfortunate. I think some of his best work was in the 60s. And certainly, Silence in the Snowy Fields is one of the finest books of poetry written by an American, I believe. And this one isn't far off. Romans angry about the inner world. What shall the world do with its children? There are lives the executives know nothing of. A leaping of the body rolling. I've felt it, and we float joyfully on the dark places. But the executioners move towards Drusilla. They tie her legs on the iron horse. Here is a woman who has seen our mother in the other world. Next they warm the hooks. The 2 Romans had put their trust in the outer world. Irons glowed like teeth. They wanted her to assure them. She refused. Finally they took burning pine sticks and pushed them into her sides. Her breath rose and she died. The executioners rolled her off onto the ground. A light snow began to fall and cover the mangled body. And the executives, astonished, withdrew. The other world is like a thorn in the ear of a tiny beast. The fingers of the executives are too thick to pull it out. It's like a jagged stone flying toward them out of the darkness. All right. Listening to President Kennedy lie about the Cuban invasion. There is another darkness, a darkness in the fences of the body, and in moles running, and telephone wires, and the frail ankles of horses, darkness of the dying grass, and yellow willow leaves. There is the death of broken buttonholes, of brutality in high places, of lying reporters. There is a bitter fatigue, adult and sad. This one is called The Great Society. Those of you who are my age and older, and others of you who are not that old but have read a lot, know The Great Society is a social program of the Johnson administration that did many very fine works. Highways were built, jobs were created. It was a good thing. Dentists continued to water their lawns even in the rain. Hands developed with terrible labor by apes hang from the sleeves of evangelists. There are murdered kings and the light bulbs outside movie theaters. The coffins of the poor are hibernating in piles of new tires. The janitor sits troubled by the boiler, and the hotel keeper shuffles the cards of insanity. The president dreams of invading Cuba. Bushes are growing over the outside grills, vines over the yachts and the leather seats. The city broods over ash cans and darkening mortar. On the far shore at Coney Island, dark children play on the chilling beach. A sprig of black seaweed, shells, a sky full of birds, while the mayor sits with his head in his hands. Suddenly Turning Away by Robert Bly. Someone comes near, the jaw tightens. Bullheads bite the snow. Moments of intimacy waved away, half-evolved antennas of the sea snail sink to the ground. The sun glints on us, but the shadows of not love come. It cannot be stood against, and we suffer. The gold discs fall from our ears. The sea grows cloudy. And after the Industrial Revolution, all things happen at once. Of course, Iron John made Robert Bly very famous, but he followed that up with a book called The Sibling Society. These are both nonfiction books. The Sibling Society talks about the ills of society today dating back to the Industrial Revolution. Actually, both books kind of refer to that, and which pulled the father away from the family and began the disintegration of the family. And in the Sibling Society, Robert Bly maintains that you have two siblings growing up in a house, and they might have more in common with a couple of siblings in Czechoslovakia, which existed when he wrote this, than they do with their parents. That's the split, the chasm between generations in this era. After the Industrial Revolution, all things happen at once. I'm not saying I necessarily agree, mind you. Now we enter a strange world where the Hessian Christmas still goes on, and Washington has not reached the other shore. The Whiskey Boys are gathering again on the meadows of Pennsylvania, and the Republic is still sailing on the open sea. I saw a black angel in Washington dancing on a barge saying, "Let us now divide kennel dogs and hunting dogs." Henry Cabot Lodge in New York talking of sugar cane in Cuba, Ford in Detroit drinking mother's milk, and Henry Cabot Lodge saying, "Remember the Maine." Ford is saying, "History is bunk." And Wilson is saying, "What is good for General Motors?" Who is it singing? Don't you hear singing? It is the dead of Cripple Creek. Coxey's army, like turkeys, are singing from the tops of trees, and the Whiskey Boys are drunk outside of Philadelphia. A big piece of everyday news in the late 60s was the peace talks between North Vietnam and the United States taking place in Paris. Asian peace offers rejected without publication. Those suggestions by Asians are not taken seriously. We know Rusk, Dean Rusk, the Secretary of State. We know Rusk smiles as he passes them to someone. Men like Rusk are not men. They are bombs waiting to be loaded in a darkened hangar. Rusk's assistants eat hurriedly, longing to get back to their office so they can cling to the underside of the steel wing shuddering faintly in the high altitudes. They land first and hand the coffee cup to the drawn pilot. They start the projector and show the movie about the mad professor. Lost angels huddle on a night branch, the waves crossing and recrossing beneath, the sound of the rampaging Missouri, bending the reeds again and again, something inside us like a ghost train in the Rockies, about to be buried in snow, in a long hoot, making the owl in the Douglas fir turn his head. All right. More anti-war poems here. Counting the small-boned bodies. Let us count the bodies over again. If only we could make the bodies smaller, the size of skulls, we could make a whole plain white with skulls in the moonlight. If only we could make the bodies smaller, maybe we could get a whole year's kills in front of us on a desk. If only we could make the body smaller, we could fit a body into a finger ring for a keepsake forever. And this one is called As the Asian War Begins. There are longings to kill that cannot be seen, or seen only by a minister who no longer believes in God, living in his parish like a crow in its nest. And there are flowers with murky centers and penetrable ebony basalt Conestogas go past, over the Platte, their contents hidden from us. Murderers riding under the canvas. Give us a glimpse of what we cannot see. Our enemies, the soldiers, and the poor. And I will finish with this poem. In danger from the outer world. This burning in the eyes as we open doors. This is the only body burdened down with leaves, this opaque flesh heavy as November grass, growing stubbornly, triumphant even at midnight, and another day disappears into the cliff, and the Eskimos come to greet it with sharp cries. The black water swells up over the new hole. The grave moves forward from its ambush, moving over the hills on black feet, living off the country, leaving dogs and sheep murdered where it slept. Some shiny thing inside has served us well, shakes its bamboo bars. It may be gone before we wake. Robert Bly, some poems from The Light Around the Body, which won the National Book Award in 1967. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back next Friday with another poetry reading for you. Stay safe